to another episode. Is not just a unity of where two people love each other, because it's easy to love someone. In fact, they say it's much more than that, because it's not about the person you love, it's about how you love them and how you show them this love. So they say you need the right tools. So tonight's episode, we're going to talk about and understand what are these tools that we need to have a successful marriage, especially in our first few stages of marriage life. So we have to ask ourselves, what are these tools? And tonight we're about to find out. So please, if you have any questions, send your questions to 0416 551 292. Or if you're courageous enough, give us a call and we'll answer your questions tonight live on the show. So I'd like to introduce you to tonight's guest. We have with us Father Joseph Ghattas. Welcome, Father.
Thank you, Mina.
It's a pleasure having you.
The pleasure's all mine.
We've had you before and it was a very successful and wonderful episode.
Thank you, Mina.
So right into the topic. So first question I have is, a lot of people are asking, so let's say, for hypothetical reasons, let's say I'm married, and I'm going to ask you these questions as if I'm married. So going into marriage, so what are the issues that I would be facing, especially in the first few stages as a newlywed couple?
Okay, so in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, I mean, I think most of the time we find that the pressures of life in general are one of the biggest issues. Like if you think about a busy lifestyle that we live here in Australia, across the world now with the age of internet and everything being at our fingertips, it's a very busy lifestyle that we live. So usually time problem is one of the biggest issues. And also more importantly than the time issue is the lack of time for God. And when we lack time for God in our life, then we lack time for other things in our life. So, you know, a lot of couples in the first year argue a lot about money, for example. What are we going to spend our money on? How are we going to save up? How are we going to afford a mortgage? How are we going to afford to buy a house? Money is a lot of issues. Getting used to living with someone else, all the quirky things that people do, and you know, whether he gets out of bed with his left foot or his right foot, all those sorts of things. People get used to each other in the first year. Habits, there's bad habits that we might come into the marriage with, like if you hang your clothes up or not. So my wife always is picking on me because I don't hang my clothes up, and she's one that always hangs her clothes up. So it's these habits that we come into that sometimes cause a lot of issues. Money problems, as we say. There's also when you've been married for a while and you've had children. How do you bring up the children? How do you discipline them? What sort of diet do you give your children? All sorts of parenting issues that come in between different views on how to parent and how to bring up children. One of the other things that we have is household responsibilities. When you're used to living at home with mum and dad and they do everything, and then all of a sudden you're married and you have to share the chores around the house. So what do? Who does what? Sometimes some people actually do like a roster of who's going to do what. Or with love, we can work with each other and work on getting things done around the house anyway. The time apart, when you spend time apart, and you're struggling for time, that causes a lot of issues as well. One of the other issues that we have is sex, and how frequent and how often and when and so on. So that causes a bit of tension between couples, especially in the first year when they're trying to settle in and trying to work out, what balance they have within their life.
Okay. Well, from your experience with newlyweds in the first year, what would you say is the biggest issue?
I think a lack of God, for starters, for sure, because if you have God with you throughout the journey of marriage, remember in church we say what God has joined together, let no man separate. God has joined you together, so you are one, you become one. And the issues start when God is no longer there, and the separation and this time apart. I think time and spending time together and getting used to the habits that we come into the marriage and the preconceived idea or ideas that we've had about marriage before that we come into marriage with, that could also cause a lot of problems and could be a major issue. But I think definitely the lack of God. In Psalm 63:1 it says, "Oh God, my God, early will I seek you, my soul thirsts for you, my flesh longs for you. And if we live our life in marriage with that motto, that we are thirsty always for the Lord, together in unity, the three of us, my wife, myself, and God with us, then we are always thirsty for the word of the Lord. We're always thirsty to spend time with God. We're always thirsty to do things that pleases God. We're always thirsty to go to church together. We're thirsty to do everything around God.
Okay. So going into a marriage, so what expectations should a couple discuss before going into it?
I think the engagement period is one of those very nice periods, and getting to know someone and sort of dating someone at the beginning. It's one of those times when you really need to understand likes and dislikes, habits, so that you can understand what you're moving into. Understand the person, how they think, what ticks them off, what doesn't, what sort of triggers certain reactions with them, so you get to know them during that time. Also, of course, you're talking about God and the priority of God in your life. I recall having to speak to someone recently about a marriage that she was about to get into, and the person wasn't from a religious background. I said to her, how and where do you place God in your life? Is God a high priority in your life? And when she said yes, and that's when we started talking about what sort of issues will we have when someone places God at a very high priority compared to someone who places God at a much lower priority. And they're the things that we need to understand very clearly at the beginning, and because they will drive a wedge between us. So if we, for example, if you're one who would always wake up at 6:30 in the morning to get to church by 7:30 because you want to be there when the mass begins at 8, compared to someone who wants to get to church at 10 o'clock just to have Holy Communion and attend the last half an hour of church. So there's a difference, and that's what we should discover at the beginning, alongside all the other habits. But I think if we said that God and priority of God is number one thing that we need to be careful of, and that's why I think during the engagement period we really need to do that. I always recommend what I call holy dating, or dating within the realm of the church. So if you're going to get to know someone engaged and you want to know that person, we don't do what the world does when it comes to dating. So what I mean by that is, where do we go to get to know each other? We get to know each other inside the church. We go to Bible studies together. We go to masses together. As we're engaged, we do these things together. So we're not doing worldly things like going out and doing other things that are physical, for example, during our engagement period, which causes us to have a wedge between us. So godly things during the dating period, that also draws you closer to each other and to God.
So before going into a marriage, should a couple discuss whether they choose one confession father to confess at, or is it possible to have fathers even after marriage? Keeping your own confession father after marriage is something that the couple need to talk about and decide on. It is preferable to have the same confession father, because then he can help you through it. But it's not necessary. It's not necessary. You can have two different confession fathers, and they can talk to each other if they have to. But not obviously about your confession, but about marital issues and so on. But it is preferable if it's the same confession father that you have, and makes things a little bit easier, but not impossible, obviously, to get along. Okay. Yeah. From your experience, after marriage, do people ever change as characters, as their own personalities?
Yeah.
And also, following up to that, what kind of changes happen to these people?
Yeah, one thing that I do get worried about is people thinking that I can go into this marriage and then I can change this person. No, we can't do that. It's not that we are able to change someone. No one changes because you're forcing them to change. No one changes because you're asking them to change. No one can change unless they truly are touched by God and they change, especially for the good. Okay, people do change and can change for the worse, but truly to change for the good, it has to be an individual and something that individually we sort of we push ourselves towards. So, normally, like if I give you an example, St. Augustine, his mum was crying for him many years to try and convince him to come back to Christianity, or to go to Christianity, and he wouldn't. And then he took his Bible and was sitting at a park, and he wasn't even very interested in reading the Bible, and he sat there watching kids play. And it's only through the voice of one little child who says, pick up and read, that he actually picked up and read the Bible, and that's how he's changed his life. It's the voice of the Lord touching him wanting to change, not because of his mother's prayer. Of course, his mother's prayers helped, but it's also because of the individual. So always when I speak to people about that is, don't think that you can change a person after marriage except through prayers. Of course, you can pray for them and they can change, but always realize that the person will change only if they want to change, only if they see that they want to change, especially if they want to change for the better.
So before going into a marriage, should a couple seek counselling, generally speaking? And also I want to ask specifically, should couples in our Coptic community do the engagement course?
Yeah, I think for sure they should look at getting counselling and getting advice and reading lots of books that are available out there for being able to understand marriage better. And for sure within our Coptic community as well, that they should definitely do the engagement course and other courses that are available outside to help them understand what marriage is. And pick up and read a lot of books, as I say, and the Bible itself has a lot of examples of good and bad marriages and what makes a marriage successful and what doesn't make a marriage successful. So yes, definitely have your spiritual advice and as well as your day-to-day advice that you can get from a counsellor or a counselling course.
And even after marriage, this is prior to marriage. So let's say after marriage, where maybe someone would have the mentality, oh, it's too late now, we're already married, I can't seek advice prior. So is there a way that they can seek advice after and do a course after or something like that? Yeah,
I think definitely. And obviously, if the marriage is starting to break down and break up and there's issues in there, straight away try and find a counsellor, marriage counsellor, a good Christian marriage counsellor who can then teach you how to fix the issues that you're having within your marriage. So to become a Christian counsellor, you would have had to study, apart from studying normal counselling, you would have had to study Christian counselling, which is biblically based. So we want to encourage people to look for Christian counsellors and to actually have that as soon as they see problems within the marriage. Don't let the problems fester, because when the problems fester, then you have an issue that these problems can build up and they can become a mountain out of something very small that you could have dealt with much earlier on. So as soon as something does come up, go and seek and go and look and go and read, go and speak to people, go and speak to your confession father, go and speak to counsellors and get help. And there's courses that run for people before marriage, after marriage, while they're dating, and after they have children as well. So to understand how to better raise your children, how to keep the spark within the marriage.
I want to ask you about the first few years of marriage or first year of marriage. There's always that excitement. There's always that honeymoon stage where everyone's excited and they're happy, and they travel together and they do things they couldn't do as singles. So this excitement, eventually it's going to die away. So what should someone anticipate, or what should someone do when this starts to